Hey guys, Callum from Columbus Models here again, and in this video I will be building this 1970s era Matchbox Sd.Kfz 124 Wespe, the German SPG that was based off the Panzer II chassis. So why am I doing this very old ancient kit? Well, that is because I am part of the Auckland IPMS Model Club, and we are doing a memorial build for Roy Huxley, the main box artist for Matchbox during the time. And basically the rules of this challenge are simple. We find a kit that has Roy Huxley's signature on it, one of the ones that he did, and we try and find a kit like that and build it within a 2-month period, although this only took me, I think, a combined total of maybe 2.5 weeks to do, but it is a 1:76 scale kit. Took me a surprising amount of time to actually find this kit. Turns out Matchbox kits in New Zealand are quite difficult to come by. Took me weeks to find this one. As you can see, it's not in the best condition, probably kept in someone's garage for a long time. You can see the window there has been torn out. And yeah, it's not in the best condition, as well as the parts. We'll just have a look through here. We've got the hull and the upper hull with some paint on them. The gun has mostly been made up, but I'm going to have to fix it because it wasn't done right. We have some of the sprues here with quite a few bits missing, including the Diorama base that is included with Matchbox armor kits, so unfortunately I'm going to have to make my own. As well as things like the gun shield for the gun are actually missing as well, so I'm going to have to do something about that. But considering I only paid something like $12 for this kit and it took me weeks to find it, I'm going to get straight into it. And the first part we're going to start working on, of course, is the single piece interior into the lower hull. And after we've done that, we cement the open superstructure onto the upper hull. This is made up of 3 pieces, the 2 side superstructures and the rear superstructure, which has some nice panel line details for the folding gun deck. Unfortunately, you cannot pose it in open, only as closed. Now, as outlined in the intro, this kit was missing the gun shield, so I'm going to have to make my own one. Now, I'm still learning scratch building skills, so this will be a close enough gun shield. It won't be, absolutely perfect. Using styrene sheet, I cut 2 panels to sit either side of the gun. It's supposed to be a bit more rounded than what I ended up being, but I tried a few times to try and get the shape, but yeah, I was kind of struggling with how to figure that out, so eventually I just went with 2 flat panels and a close enough attitude. As you can see here, I tried a few times testing out different shapes until I got the shape I wanted. After I cemented them in, I cut them and trimmed the shield panels to size relative to looking on diagrams how high it should be, as well as using the gun in the middle as a guide for just what the gap width between the 2 gun shield panels should be. After that, I added on this holder for the 2 jerry cans that sit on the outside side of the Wespe, as well as the spare road wheel that sits on the hull roof. This is very common for the Panzer II and all derivatives. They had this spare road wheel that was attached by brackets on the front of the hull. Now it's time to close the 2 hull halves together, the upper and the lower. The fit wasn't the best, but after quite a bit of pressure and some CA glue, they eventually sat perfectly flush with each other. Considering this is a 1970s era kit, I've had to deal with more modern, worse kits than this, so it went together fairly well. You just require a little bit of patience and glue. There were a couple of gaps between the hull halves, so some putty was needed. Whilst I was filling in these gaps and I had the putty out, I mixed it with a little bit of Tamiya Extra Thin and stippled it onto the hull to add a bit of texture to the areas that would have had a cast texture. There's areas on the Wespe that were cast texture, not rolled and welded, especially around the driver's hatch and compartment. It just helps add a bit of detail and texture to a fairly flat looking model. Just adds a bit of detail, just a little bit of extra something. Now to add some AK light grey primer to tie all the components together. It just required one thin coat as I didn't want to risk losing a lot of the fine panel lines and details of this kit. It's quite easy to swamp panel lines with primer, especially this thick. Up next was the base color, using Tamiya's XF59 Desert Yellow with a little Tamiya XF52 Flat Earth mixed into it. These are both enamel paints, as I use primarily Tamiya enamels for most of my painting. Next, I added a few drops of Tamiya XF55 Deck Tan to lighten the desert base color, and sprayed it on all the panels and upper surfaces to create artificial highlights and shadows, just as a way to show a little bit of contrast in otherwise a very bland and flat color. Especially at this sort of scale, 76 scale, you want to try and sort of just up the contrast on all your sort of shadows and highlights and stuff, just to make it a bit more visually interesting. Otherwise you end up with a small model with it's quite bland to look at if you just have it all as one color and no real modulation or contrastiness. Switching to the paintbrush now, and a few more drops of Deck Tan into the base color, well, the highlighted base color. I painted all the raised edges and details to bring even more contrast. Again, just to try and up the contrast, but also to show off some of the details, because even for a 1970s kit, this Wespe actually has quite a few good details to it, so it's always best to highlight what it's got. I mixed Tamiya's XF24 dark grey and XF1 flat black to make a dark tyre rubber colour to paint all the road wheels and also the return rolling wheels. I had a lot of the leftover paint from the XF24 dark grey and XF1 flat black, so I had to paint the tracks next, so I added in some Tamiya XF56 metallic grey to make a dark metal colour to paint onto all the tracks, and I also did this with the paintbrush because these tracks are very, very small. Didn't need a airbrush for that one. With the wheels done, it was time to add a pin wash to all the details, especially around this it's not a torsion bar suspension, it is a leaf spring suspension on single bogies. This is a later variant of the Panzer II, from about the F or even the D model onwards. The earlier ones had a more Panzer I-esque type suspension with the bar running across all the road wheel. After the pin wash, I used some oil paint, a very, very lightened version of the desert sand, to dry brush around the suspension to try and further bring out the details. This is of course just dabbing on oil paint in some of the larger areas and around the details, and using a soft brush to blend and dry brush it in just to highlight especially these leaf spring suspension, because there's quite a bit of detail in them. Now to start the weathering in the form of dust effects. No mud this time, pure dust. First I mixed European Earth pigment powder, the AK brand, with terps to make it into a wash. This allows all the pigment powder to run around the suspension details, similar to a standard pin wash. And this is because terps and pigment powder run easier than terps and water, and also they create two different types of effects. This one is more of a defined pin wash. When that dried, I mixed the pigment powder with water and painted it around the lower hull. Then, when it dried, I usually use a hairdryer to speed up the process. I used a stiff, damp brush to drag the powder in a downward movement. This creates a dust and water streak down the hull, as if dust has collected on it and it's either fallen down naturally or they've tried to wash it off. Doing this allows the dust effect to pool on top of the suspension and on top of things where dust and sand would occur naturally, just to create the illusion of a very dusty suspension. After that, it's time to start gluing all the parts, like the road wheels and the rubber band tracks, which, as you can see, were a bit fiddly and it did take a little bit of time to attach each of them. Don't be like me and put the idler wheel and the two big wheels, the idler wheels and the running gear wheel, in before you put the track, otherwise you make it very difficult for yourself to actually put that track in because things get in the way, so don't be like me. Once the tracks were on, I could add some more of the pigment powder and water solution onto them. Then, when that all dried, I used a cotton bud and rubbed the excess off, which takes all the dust effect off the raised parts, such as the tips of the tracks and whatnot. But it does keep the dust effects in the recesses of the tracks and wheels where it would collect up and wouldn't fall off naturally. You'd have to get in and clean them. You'll also see that I added this dust effect around all the crevices on the upper hull as well, just to show that dust had accumulated on top. Continuing with adding parts, we start filling the interior. First with the radio set on the superstructure wall, then the ammo for the 105mm howitzer, as well as the jerry cans on the side. I ended up weathering the howitzer off camera with Tamiya XF56 metallic grey and a sponge to create chipping effects around the parts of the howitzer that move when recoiling, specifically the rail for the breech block, the breech itself, around the barrel and the hinges. The MG34 was also painted and pin washed off camera. This 34 is quite basic in detail, and I could have replaced it with another more detailed one, but I wanted to use as many of the original parts in this build as I could. Next up are the two figures, the tank commander and the crewman, which is acting as mechanic. These two figures actually have a lot of crisp, sharp details, which is quite surprising for a kit of this vintage. First up, after priming them in AK light grey, I started with the uniform colour, using Vallejo khaki and khaki grey as the base colours. I used a thicker brush than normal just because I wanted to get the base coloured paint down as quickly as possible. With the base colour down, I added some more khaki grey into the mix, and using a 000 brush, I started adding highlights to all the parts of the uniform that would be up in the sun, primarily on the top surfaces. I made the paint mix into a almost glaze, just slightly off, and this is just to help blend the two colours together, the highlight and the base colour. So you go through and basically just pick out all the raised edges, all the upper parts of the uniform, stuff like that, that would be highlighted by natural sunlight. It's quite a fun, relaxing process to do, to be honest. After highlights, I painted shadows after adding some grey-green into the light khaki colour to create a shadow colour, and then you go through and paint all the recesses, quite the opposite to doing the highlights. And after the shadows, I used Tamiya's dark brown pin wash around all the details to finally highlight some of those details, just to bring the... you might as well use the crisp and sharpness of the details for these figures to your advantage. So just giving a pin wash right at the end, just very controlled, not over the whole lot, just very controlled along the lines, and it does bring out the quite astonishing amount of detail these figures actually have. I have dealt with 72nd, 76 scale figures that have way less detail than these. These are quite nice. Now for the flesh tones. First up, adding a mid-flesh tone as the base. Then I picked out all the raised parts with a light flesh tone to highlight all the features. Then, to bring shadows and to tie all the flesh tones together, I used a glaze of a darker flesh tone. Right at the end, this pulls into all the recesses of the face, creates a natural shadow, highlights stuff like the jawline, the cheekbones, nose, all those areas in a face that show prominently, and it just adds a little bit of extra contrast to the face, brings out the details, makes them look a bit more realistic. You also do that for the hands as well, and the bare legs of the crewman who is the mechanic. You do this mainly just, I mean, it's a small scale, you won't see too much, but it's worth doing, it's good for practice as well. And if you do it right, which I think I did, it ends up looking really good at the scale. Now, it's time to finish this build with a base. Of course, the base that normally comes in this kit wasn't available, so I had to make my own. So to finish off, we started with this block of balsa wood and used the AK Desert Sand textured paint all over the top as a start. And while the paint was still wet, I pressed in XPS foam that was torn into shapes that might resemble rocks. It took a bit of time for me to get the layout of the rocks, but eventually I ended up with something I was happy with. After that, I sprinkled red gravel chips, around the foam rocks and around the area that would form something like a road on the other side of the base. Then I added grass tufts using Army Painter's swamp grass tufts. Oh, I am struggling today. Scaled for 1/72nd scale. These were added around the rock formations. Used different sizes around the cracks and crevices to add a bit of detail around the rocks, show different plants of different ages and sizes. I also added some tufts on the other side of where the tank will go, and added a few more rocks around that side as well, just for a bit of added detail. Once they're all glued down, I sprayed everything with flat black to unify it, and to start with all the shadow work. Whilst I had the black in the airbrush, I also painted some accessories I 3D printed to add to the Wespe interior, such as ammo cans, jerry cans, a toolbox, a couple of machine guns. Wasn't sure if I was going to use them or not, so better to have them and not need them. Now for some colour. First was grey-green and khaki, and this was sprayed all over the grass tufts for a base colour for them. This is to start with building up our color layers, starting with darker first and then working our way up to lighter. Next up was a coat of desert sand, and this is actually going to be our main shadow color on top of the black base for the dust and for the rock formations. Then I added flat earth and deck sand to the original desert sand color to make a more lighter dusty color. I sprayed this all over the top of the base details, with the desert sand color showing as a shadow underneath all the rocks. You can see here in the footage that the rocks in the road are starting to get a more natural look to the colors. We have the desert sand underneath creating a fake shadow as if there was sun shining directly down from above. And it just adds a bit of contrast to the rocks with the lighter desert sand on top, making it look more flatter and realistic. Now for some extra highlights and to create a more natural dusty, as opposed to a painted on dust effect, I used European earth pigment powder again, same used as the Wespe, which is always important. You've got to match up your colours. As well as the soft brush, I dry brushed the pigment powder all over the tops of the rock formations, the grass tufts, as well as the road, to give it a proper dust looking effect. You can use pigments as a dry brush like this, as if it was paint. It just helps create a soft dust look onto things. With the last touches now to finish off the build, the last bit was to paint the sides of the base black. Or, well, it's not quite black, but actually like a dark charcoal. And then the Wespe was glued down to the base, as well as all the figures in their relevant pose and places, and a couple of the 3D printed accessories, such as the toolbox and extra jerry cans. And with that, my build of the Matchbox 1/72nd Sd.Kfz 124 Wespe is complete. Before we go on to the reveal, I just want to tell you guys, if you want, you can sign up to my Patreon, patreon.com/Columbus Models. There for $5 a month, you can support me. And with that, I have been designing a whole bunch of STL files for people who join up. They can use for things from different gun barrels and gun accessories, shells, different shell types, stuff like that, all the way through to whatever I decide to make. This is kind of just me learning how to do 3D design. So anything I do make will be chucked onto the Patreon, or you can go to Cults 3D. You'll find me there at Columbus Models. And there you have it, my Matchbox Sd.Kfz 124 Wespe in 1/76 scale, a 1970s vintage kit. And I gotta say, for a 1970s kit, I need to find myself another Matchbox kit, because this one was thoroughly enjoyable. So, all it leaves me to say is a big shout out to my very first patron, Lord Floki, as well as to all you still watching the video. I'd like to ask you if you could like and subscribe and possibly comment on this video, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.